Good morning, Suidlanders. How are you? We hope that all is well with you. The image, the screenshot, the still on the screen over there has got nothing to do with this video. It's just something that I'm researching at the moment. It's quite important that Suidlanders should keep abreast of developments in Russia, the Crimea, Ukraine, Nord Stream 2, the very, very tetchy relationships that Russia, or relationship or non-relationship as the Russians have been at pains to describe it as, that they have with the European Union at the moment, and the combative, hostile relationship that they have with the United States of America. The USA is claiming that it's not really troubled by things in Russia. There have been some remarks to that effect, that it's insignificant and that their main attention is focused upon China. But that's not the truth, and not by a long chalk. There's a movie, oh dear me, God, drat, I can't think of the name of the movie. I can only think of one of the stars, and he's not even the main star, so I won't waste your time. But there's a movie which was produced about 10 years ago that hints at the very things that are happening now. The undermining of the dollar, tension between the USA and Russia, and so on. And a lot of it looks as if it's coming to a head, and it's a very complicated thing. Very, very complicated. It would take hours to describe the fine points of it. And we, Suidlanders, have been holding enormous debates with some very highly intelligent, very highly skilled, competent, capable, well-informed, learned people by telephone and internet and so on over recent months, because this stuff all goes back to 2004, it goes back to 1995, it goes back to 1990, and indeed, it goes back to 1989, with the beginnings of the breakup of the Soviet Union, which, contrary to popular report, contrary to mainstream media report, began, in fact, in Estonia, with a very, very, very interesting thing. I think I'm going to have to do another video for the original topic, because we're getting a little bit embroiled in this historical stuff. Or in this Russo-European American drama. A very interesting thing. Shortly before, okay, the first thing to say, I think, to give some fixed points of reference, to create a frame of reference in people's minds. For those of you who don't know, the Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939 with the German invasion of Poland. But what they never tell you in the BBC documentaries and PBS documentaries and so on is that the German invasion of Poland was restricted to 49% of Polish territory. That some months before, Hitler and Stalin, Comstock, the biggest enemies in the world, supposedly, had reached an agreement in what later became known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop pact. That's not its correct name, but that's the only name 99% of people ever use. They had a treaty, they reached a pact, they reached an agreement that the Germans would go to war very shortly, 1st of September, and the day the Russians could pull in a short while afterwards. The day the Germans would take 49% of Poland, and that Russia could take 51%. We're going to jump around a little bit. During the Nuremberg trials, after the end of the Second World War, Joseph Stalin sent an emissary to Joachim von Ribbentrop, who was incarcerated as part of the Nuremberg trials. He was being tried, to say to him, please don't mention during your trial the existence of the pact. If you keep your mouth shut, we, the Soviets, will ensure that you are not convicted of the worst crimes, or at the very least that you are not sentenced to hang. Ribbentrop flatly ignored them, and he spoke of the Molotov-Ribbentrop pact during his trial. It was subsequently covered up. Had you ever heard of it in the 70s, 80s, 90s? No, it was completely covered up in a conspiracy of Western governments and Western media. Left-wing governments, right-wing governments, it doesn't matter. For 40 years, from the end of 1945, or from 1945, it was covered up. Can you imagine? You know, people accuse we conservatives of right-wing conspiracy and what have you, right? Conspiracy theories. And the reality is that it's not a conspiracy theory. You tell me, had you in the 1980s heard of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact? And had you heard, if you had maybe heard a whisper of it by the 1990s, had you heard of its real substance? No. The whole world collaborated, the powers that be, the elites of our societies, those in the uppermost echelons of the hierarchies of Western societies collaborated, conspired to pretend as if it didn't exist. Meanwhile, it was certainly the most important agreement or pact pertaining to World War II. It was the pact in which the Nazis and the communists agreed to split Poland in half and to, within 17 days of one another, go into World War II. Not against one another. Not against one another, but the fact remains that they were both aware that they were now going into the maelstrom of what had to turn out. You only have to read John Gunter's Inside Europe. Very good book, if you can ever get hold of it. And to know that there was universal understanding, absolutely universal understanding throughout Europe, and largely in the USA too, that if the fuse was struck, that there would be a pan-European conflict. So these guys shook hands with one another, knowing full well that it was going to lead to an enormous conflagration that later became known as World War II. Anyway, I beg your pardon. Anyway, in 1988, so we're jumping forward a bit and we'll jump back a bit. So there's this secret agreement, hidden from all of the West, never mind the East, that splits up Poland. But part of the agreement allocates Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania to the Soviet sphere of interest, that they be, more than the sphere of interest, that they be incorporated into the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, that they would become 3 of the republics of the Soviet system. For those of you who don't know, for those of you who've wandered for decades and decades, what means Soviet? Soviet means a village council. So the idea was that this communist system was based upon very good democracy. That at the lowest levels, at the smallest, there was always representation. That this was the stereotype, what is the word? The epitome of democracy. So the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And in 1988, the Soviet Union began to work towards the opening of the world's largest phosphorite mine in Ethiopia. I beg your pardon. Listen to me. Estonia. In Estonia. Okay? And it elicited a nationalistic opposition. Estonians as Estonians, Estonians as nationalists, Estonians as patriots, Estonians as an identifiable, distinct ethnic group with roots going back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, came together to oppose this Soviet phosphorite mine on Estonian territory, a mine which by virtue of its size and what have you was bound to destroy an enormous, beautiful, immaculate, virgin piece of Estonia, natural habitat. At that time, a Estonian parliamentarian, obviously within the communist system, within the Soviet socialist system, but an Estonian in the Estonian parliament, stumbled across evidence or was informed, and to this day I must say I've never heard or seen or read or whatever who informed him, how he stumbled across this evidence, but he discovered the existence of the Molotov-Ribbentrop pact and managed to get hold of a copy of it. Again, where from? Nobody knows, apparently, or very few people, to this day. And he publicized it. And it caused an enormous uproar in this environment, in this period of time of Estonian nationalism. At this point in time in which the Estonians had come together as a people to oppose a Soviet initiative, even though they were one of the constituent republics of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So he kind of harnessed this patriotic opposition to the Soviet system that had been brought to the surface by the phosphorite mine controversy. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, he had the support of hundreds of thousands of people. There were marches everywhere. People were indignant. There were confrontations in the parliament. There were confrontations with the Russians who dominated the Soviet socialist system, even though in theory Russia was the biggest but only one of many constituent parts of the Union of Soviet Republics. And that led to the breakup of the Soviet Union. It was the first concrete, substantial event. And to this day, it's not reported as such by the global media, and it's hardly the mainstream media, and it's hardly alluded by the mainstream establishment politicians, presumably because it's such a sensitive thing. Because the moment that an American president confronts that matter directly and advertises it, the moment that the mainstream media, addresses it as adequately as it should be addressed, they're going to give the lie to their antecedents, their forerunners. There was 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, it's now nearly 70 years of what do you call it, conspiratorial cover-up by CBS, NBC, ABC, BBC, and so the list goes on. Now, it is true that that breakup had a lot to do with the financial failure of the Soviet Union. But what people miss in this is that it's a relative thing. The Soviet Union was trying too hard to keep up with the United States of America militarily, and it didn't have enough money to do so. But the very reason why the United States of America, particularly but not only, the rest of the West too, yes, it's true, but particularly the United States of America as the vanguard And the main, the thorax, the main bodily part of the West was able to set such a high pace financially was because of a combination of three factors. Number one, that the US dollar was the settlement currency of international trade. That it was the kind of the currency of last resort. Number two, that following the Bretton Woods Agreement and the 13th of August and the 15th of August 1971, most of the world's currencies were pegged to the US dollar, which again lent strength to it. And finally, the concept of the petrodollar, whereby you can't buy oil from Saudi Arabia and other allies of Saudi Arabia in any currency but the dollar, which enabled the USA to print dollars freely. Russia couldn't get away, or the Soviet Union, I should say, couldn't get away with such blue murder, as it were. So it's false to say that the crisis was precipitated by Russia's financial failure, without adding a financial failure caused by Russia's, or the Soviet Union, I beg your pardon, the Soviet Union's desperate attempts to keep up with the USA in the arms race, in which endeavor it was manifestly disadvantaged by the American dollar's artificial status, or the artificial value of the US dollar created by the scandalous petrodollar system and the scandal of the Nixon's announcements in August 1971, and previous to that, the scandal, the utter scandal of the Bretton Woods system implemented at the Mount Washington Hotel outside Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, between the 1st and the 22nd of June, I think, 1944. Or the agreement reached then and then implemented 1945 onwards. There or thereabouts. Don't hold me to it. So, we've been talking a long time about this now. I'll try to wrap up quickly. For those of you who are interested, who have stuck through this long monologue. So that led to the breakup of the USSR. And during that breakup, two American presidents promised Gorbachev and Yeltsin faithfully, absolutely faithfully, that one thing that they would not do is take advantage of the Soviet Union's breakup to expand NATO, which they promptly did do. I don't know what is the right word, perfidiously, deceitfully, dishonestly, duplicitously, in a double-dealing and devious manner, which in turn led to the Russians and their kind of client states, Moldova, White Russia, and others, having to fight for their existences. Fight very fiercely. Computer hacking of systems, supporting political parties, this, that, the next thing. It's very complicated. And the West's position was exacerbated by the meddling of the USA in the Maidan revolutions, the Euromaidan. Maidan, in fact, means square. It was the Euromaidan, the Euro Square, in Kiev, in Ukraine. And now we're at a point where, in some regards, Russia has the upper hand. Russia has the upper hand in the Crimea. Russia has the upper hand, although it would say it's not involved, in the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. And Russia has the upper hand with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is going to have a manifest effect upon the export of US natural gas. And the US is bitterly opposed to it. It's done everything in its power to stop Russia from building pipelines through Central Europe into Western Europe to provide natural gas for heating and other purposes. So that's been a long story, and we've come full circle to why I'm watching stories of Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. There's a lot going on at the moment, a lot of boxing, and we Saitlanders are trying to stay on top of it as best we can. And it's one of the many things to which we're paying a lot of attention at the moment. There's a huge amount going on in the world and in South Africa. Anyway, if you enjoyed that sermon, thank you for your patience, and we'll speak to you again very, very soon. God bless you, everybody. Bye-bye.